And today we're going to be looking at replacing the struts on your car. This is a fairly common maintenance procedure and can be fairly costly if you take it to a shop, but with a few simple hand tools and maybe a tool rental, it's something you can very easily do yourself. We're going to be looking at a 2007 Dodge Caliber today, but these steps are going to be pretty much identical for any front strut replacement, and it'll be pretty similar in the back. For any coilover suspension system where you have a strut that goes through the middle and then the spring coil that goes around it, coil over. It can be hard to tell if your struts need to be replaced. You can take it to a shop and have them take a look at it, get their opinion, but generally if your car is bouncing a lot when you go over a bump, the shock isn't dampening the spring very effectively, usually it's pretty easy to tell. And a visual inspection can also be very revealing. In this one here, it's particularly obvious. You can see the boot surrounding the shock has completely disintegrated. The bushing at the top of the strut has ripped and fallen off. So usually there's this bushing right here at the top that provides some sound dampening and a little bit of cushiness. And when you go over a bump right now, you'll hear a kind of rattle when it hits a bump as the strut is bouncing up against the strut tower. So very easy to see, you know, a failed strut in this case. And the main specialty tool you're going to need is a spring compressor. I suggest an outside clamping spring compressor, so you have the spring that goes around, and you have a spring clamp that goes into the side and squeezes it down. And we'll demonstrate that later in the video. And pretty much everything else is just some pretty simple hand tools. So let's get started by removing the wheel. Now we have the wheel removed and we can see the strut itself. Usually removing the strut is pretty simple. There's going to be a few bolts on top that secure it to the strut tower, and then a couple bolts on the bottom that secure it to the wheel hub assembly. In this case there's two large bolts right here that are securing it. And of course you want to make sure you remove any hangers for brake line, ABS line, sway bar, end link, whatever. But the most critical part here is to make sure that we compress the shock before we disconnect anything, because there could be a lot of tension here, and if we just pull these bolts, it could disconnect explosively. It depends on the car whether or not the lower A-arm is going to come down far enough to allow all the tension to be relieved from the shock. But better safe than sorry, and it varies a little bit from application to application. The way these spring compressors work is really straightforward. You've just got the coils that hook into these links and secure with these pins. And I really prefer, there's two different designs. There's one that comes in from the outside, and there's another that goes inside the spring with two arms that hook on it, and I usually prefer this design. Some applications you need one or the other, but I usually get the best results with this kind. And you can see I have one here that's already been hooked up to the spring. I've got these two jaws on here with the two safety pins securing it, and then all you do is just put a wrench or a ratchet on this screw and tighten it down. And you can see I've only got one link right here between the jaws, which isn't ideal, but sometimes it can be hard to get them up on there on 2 or 3 links. And then later on, when we replace the strut unit itself, we might need to undo one compressor and move it up a couple links and to compress the entire spring. Right now we're just getting enough clamping pressure on here to secure it, so it's not going to explosively decompress when we disconnect the strut from the wheel hub assembly and the strut tower. So let's compress the spring and then start undoing our fasteners. And we have all of our smaller fasteners here with all of our ancillary connections for brakes and ABS disconnected. We have our sway bar end link disconnected. Depending on your application, you might have a tie rod end to disconnect here. Those can be a little bit trickier to remove. You're going to have to loosen this nut and tighten it against, or loosen it against this this inner stud right here, and it'll probably be frozen on there. Just hit it with a sledgehammer right on the side, just like that, and that will usually pop it loose, or from the top. On the caliper though, the steering end link is the outer tie rod end is attached to the wheel hub assembly, not to the shock strut assembly, so that's not a problem for us here. So we removed the two nuts on the ends of these two bolts right here, and then we've still got one bolt left right here, and we're just going to leave that one in place. And again, it really depends on your application. Some will have load in their shock strut assembly, some won't. We're just going to kind of shake it here. It's still pretty solid. Some will be real loose if there's no tension at all, and that's just what we're looking for to make sure that nothing, explodes on us when we remove any of these last couple of fasteners. I suggest starting at the top for our last few fasteners. There's usually 3 or sometimes 4 nuts that go into studs on the top of the strut tower here. I've already removed 2 of them, and I've just got the last one, and you can see it's very loose. There's no tension here, so nothing crazy is going to happen when we disconnect these last fasteners. So we'll disconnect this guy, and we can be confident that when we remove that last bolt at the bottom, the worst thing that's going to happen is our hub assembly just kind of flops over, and you want to be mindful of that. If your hub assembly doesn't have, for example, a tie rod end connected to it, it might just fall forward, and it can damage your wheel speed sensor, ABS lines, or brake lines. Ours is held on there, so that's not going to be a problem for us. So we just need to remove this this last bolt here, and that should be it. So we're going to just tap it with the sledgehammer and see if we can get it loose. Should we get our brake line out of the way? It's edging forward just a little bit. Try using a drift, a screwdriver in this case. Make sure you don't mar any of the threads. Make sure we don't have any tension anywhere here. Make sure we don't catch any of our lines, get any bad tension on any of our lines as we remove that strut tower assembly. Everything's real loose here. If anything does look like it's being restricted, I would suggest getting just a bungee cable or zip tie, whatever, and just fastening it to the strut tower or anything like that. But everything looks real loose, as it should be. And now we're ready to go to work on our strut assembly. If you are replacing the strut and spring as an assembly, which you can purchase that, you're basically done. You're just going to reinstall the new unit at this point. There's nothing wrong with our spring. It doesn't appear to be damaged or worn any place, and it's pretty common to replace the shocks in your car. It's a lot less common to replace the springs, so usually you just need a shock replacement, and that's what we need in this case. So what we're going to do is we're going to unfasten our spring compressor, grip it up a little bit higher on one of these coils, and then compress the spring and remove it from the strut assembly and get it onto our new strut. And we've got both of our spring compressors clamped down here on 3 links as tight as we need to. And now this top clamp is free moving. You can see there's no tension here between the spring and this top plate. And all that's left is just to unscrew this nut that holds it down, and then we're going to be able to pull the plate off and remove the spring. And it's just critical to make sure that there's no tension here, that nothing is going to decompress when we remove that top plate. So we're ready to go. We're just going to remove this nut and then transfer the spring to our new shock. And now we have our spring installed on our new shock assembly. Things are pretty simple from here on out. We're just putting things back together the way we started, and we don't have to worry about decompressing springs or anything like that that can potentially be dangerous. The only tricky part here is to make sure that you seat the spring in the bushings correctly. There's going to be a bushing at the bottom and a bushing at the top that's going to be keyed to the spring. So this bushing has a little groove right here, and you want the end of the coil to go right in this groove. And there's going to be the exact same thing at the bottom. And also your new shock isn't necessarily going to come with all the bushings. If your bushings are damaged, obviously you want to replace them, but no matter what, you want to make sure you have bushings in your new shock unit. So we're just going to put this top plate in and make sure this groove matches up perfectly with the top of our spring. There we go, just like that. And then we've got our top plate assembly. We're just going to put that on there and tighten down this nut. And then we're going to have to tighten this nut against the inner stud here. So we're just going to have a wrench attached to this inner stud. Looks like it's an 8mm. And then a wrench attached to this nut and tighten it down. And those can be a little bit tricky, and that's the case where having an impact wrench can be very useful. But you can make it work with just sockets and wrenches and so forth. So we're just going to tighten that down and then work on getting it reinstalled. And we've got our top plate back on here, and we've got our spring compressors removed. So we have our fully assembled new strut unit, which again, you can buy them fully assembled just like this if you decide to replace the spring at the same time. Reassembly is very easy. In our particular application, I didn't see any tension on the strut assembly and the strut tower and the wheel hub, so we shouldn't need to compress it to reinstall it. And in the future we probably won't need to compress it to remove it. It just depends on your application whether that compression is necessary. I like to do it just to be safe. People make fun of me on my videos because I'm always wearing safety glasses when I don't necessarily need to be, and taking extra safety precautions like that, but when you do this enough, you definitely would rather be safe than sorry. But as you can see, it's a very easy procedure and a very costly procedure to pay for at a shop. You can save a lot of money doing it yourself, that's for sure, with just a simple couple of hand tools and then a spring compressor that you can rent at an auto parts store for free. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Just reinstall it in reverse order. If you have any questions, feel free to post them on the video, and I'll do my best to try to help. Thanks.